Now on PG Podcast Network, it's time for the year-round carnival with Vince Accardi and your host, Racetrack Ralphie.
G'day, thanks for checking out our year-round carnival Monday podcast as we review some good racing at Sandown and Rosehill. The standard of quality is getting a bit better before the Group 1 racing returns in the Ore Stakes this week at Caulfield. G'day, Vince Accardi from Daily Sectionals.
Ralphie, good morning.
Were some nice performances on Saturday?
Sure.
Nice.
No, absolutely.
Not great, but nice.
Well, we definitely had some interesting scenarios with the Sandown track, that's for sure.
Absolutely. So there was actually a couple of track records posted there. So we know that was quick. You've been able to put your IVR lens through it. First off, how did the track play overall?
Yeah, well, this is going to be very interesting. They were quick. They were super, super quick, and I had to do some dialing down. I don't want to speak out of content, but some things are questionable when you have these sort of situations with such, like booming speeds. Are you confirming are the distances exactly correct or not? Amongst a few other things where disproportionately in terms of the variation in the speed of the track from one section to another. So they're pretty wild in terms of how do you make the assessments and what do you do, because this is like I've seen it come up a couple of times at Sandown, and it was definitely hard in play when you're running that sort of time. You have to ask yourself the question. It's not that easy to work out is the distance exactly correct or not. Some tracks are very difficult to work out.
Right.
But you have to have a little bit of caution on that. And, I've left pretty much the numbers the way they are, but I have dialed down that first fractional split, because if there's going to be any arbitrage happening in the distance scenario, that's where it's going to take place. And it was like miles out from what the standard is. And when I look at Sandown, for instance, even though it's gone through layers of changes in terms of track profiling over the last few decades, the reality is the finishing post never changes, Rolf, right?
Yes.
And when you have such a aberration, usually it's to do, okay, if it's a marker issue, we can identify that, right?
Yep.
But if it's more than just the marker issue, then in some places you can sort it out. So this one, rails out 6, and is it all conforming? It's like a bit like Cranbourne, when they have a rail push change. Well, if you're coming out of let's say the 1200 metre position, it's impossible. You can't change things because it's not possible. When you look at like where the lighting is over there and the way it's all structured, it's not that distance.
So you can tell from the background. I know in the past you've said the trees don't move.
No. So it's just like crazy. And then let's flip it over and say, okay, how fast it was. Did anybody report breakdowns of horses?
No, funny about that. No.
Because it was like racing F2.
It's almost like a good grass track isn't bad for horses.
Yeah, well, we're definitely in the home straight ahead F2, Ralphie.
Well, look, let's start with the Belmain Stakes race 9. Because, however, this was slice and dice. This was a big performance by She's Bulletproof. She's a horse we first stand at Moonee Valley when she bolted in, then again at Caulfield. And this is a really interesting post-race chat on racing.com from Charlotte Littlefield, who said, I think she got away from us at Geelong, because I thought she loomed and faded and was a bit plain on the day, and there was two ways of looking at it. And afterwards, hearing Charlotte Littlefield, she basically said 7 weeks between runs. She's a big mare, got away from us, and then they screwed her down for Saturday. So how far down did they screw her, Vince? Because it looked like a big performance.
It was like massive. Overall, in terms of, when we bring in all the variations, adjustment-wise, it's coming with a plus 2.1. But if we look at the breakdown of the actual performance, that first 400 metres, 3.2 lengths below benchmark. Between the 8 and the 400, plus 2.6, and then you've got a plus 10.4 last 4. These things don't happen very often. So the good wind assistance, Ralphie, and quick track is the variations. How much of that do you want to take into place? Or what I can say is I had a really close scrutinisation of the overall and then bringing in some normality to it. And I felt that coming in with an overall figure of +2 was like bang on. Now, this is pretty much the best the horse has ever gone in terms of a 400-metre extension in any section, and the overall combined last 800 metres I just felt was like outstanding. So they've been able to take this horse, in my view, to the next level, but we've got to just be mindful of. I feel that +2 is like I threw everything at the horse, Ralphie.
As in the raw time was 9.8 and you pegged it back to 2.1.
Correct.
Yep. So I want to be on Fancify next start. It's a 1400-metre specialist. I thought it was very good. But again, I suppose looking at the IVR data, and you can get the IVR data via Sizzlers, where we also write up horses to follow, I suppose they've got the lead on their terms.
Yeah, they did get it on their terms. Still, Ralphie, overall, it was a nice pace, 0.8 below benchmark, and they really did put the heat on from pretty much inside the 700-metre mark to the finish line. So the +2.8 in the middle, very, very solid. Last 400, +5.5 for Fancify. Just last 200 just couldn't match the performance of the winner, and probably couldn't match a few other horses around it. So, yeah, I would say what you were sort of pointing out about what happened through that first section, maybe if the horse had gone another length or two faster, what would that have done? But if I look at this horse, where it's heading and bring in some reality checks to the overall performance, I actually use this as the underlying runner, because it came out of Flemington sort of before it had that break of 88 days of the +1.6, and it was pretty much rock solid around that +1 range on the RM. So I felt that this was really, really good baseline to work with, and they've got the horse going in fantastic shape, Ralphie, and I just feel if they can get back up, which they probably are, 1,400 metres, victory's coming.
Last race, name dropper. Now, it's funny how racing patterns or sort of how races pan out can help or hinder. This horse was just perfectly placed because it got 3 weeks from its first up run. Now, its first up run was serious. In Sizzlers, we wrote 0.6 lengths above benchmark, ranked 4th on the day, made it 3 wins from 3 first up runs, but this was easily the best of them to go with a big new PB from -3.1 when 4th at Moonee Valley in August. +7 at the 800 was genuine speed for an understandable taper, 1.3 and +5.3 last 2 sections. Did find 1.2 lengths last 200 in isolation under full pressure, which is a good sign of tenacity. So, sorry, it was -3 last 2 sections. So it dropped away. Could feel the run if asked to back up quickly, but he looks set for more wins this prep, noting this is only benchmark 74 level. So, as I said, didn't feel the run because 3 weeks between runs was perfect. So it's gone again, hasn't it?
Oh, it has, Ralphie, in a fantastic way too. First section +4.9. I was like, the mid was huge, +7.7. Absolutely. If you've pretty much, what have you gone? You've gone more than 12 lengths above the standard combined through the first 1,000 metres, you are entitled to absolutely cave in. And I felt that the horse didn't cave in that much. Probably just the last couple of 100 metres, the horse was done. And then when you just sort of put the lens over it with its past profile and what it did first up and what you just articulated, this was just rock solid and trending up still. This is one runner that you probably got to be a little bit excited about, Ralphie. Whilst it might be extremely forward in condition, I still feel there's a little bit more to come. And if you can get into its subsequent start, wherever that may be, there's a high probability it's probably going to get a race where you're going to breathe a lot better. And these type of setups are very, very dangerous for these sort of horses in a positive way.
So a lot was made of the track record of Revelare in the 1800 in Hillside, but of course, as you've articulated, the track played very quickly. What we did speak about last week was it was the perfect setup for a quick backup off such a literal hurdle speed, but the kickdown was big last week. So what did we learn about Revelare race to race, week to week?
Yeah. Well, I know, yeah, they're funny. They're doing like the South Australian. They got to bring the hillside into play.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is interesting, Ralphie, when you look at this particular horse and try and sort of understand, okay, what's it all mean? First of all, okay, you got a track record, which I find interesting within itself. But overall, on the Raws, the horse has scored a +4. I have retuned that first split time, Ralphie. The overall number that I ended up with was a -2.7. So I just sort of sit back here and say, okay, that's where I've ended up for a horse that, you know, for all intensive purposes, has broken the track record. And you would expect it to be a much higher number. But then when you look at this horse and the amount of starts it's had, it hasn't had a lot of starts. It's pretty crazy that you can come out and run a track record with its current profile. Of course, that last run on the lakeside over the mile was pretty much a hurdle type pace. Yeah, I'm on the fence, Ralphie, about like what's it all mean, because I'm not giving it the full big tick saying, okay, you've broken the track record and you probably should be a +5 horse.
So people listening to this would think that's a savage haircut. So +4 is the raw time. So that's unadjusted, and you've adjusted it down. What have you adjusted down? 6.3 lengths. So you've given it a real big haircut.
Yep.
There was a space between the second and third horse, a big space. So it seemed real. So why have you given it such a big haircut?
Well, first of all, when you look at it, let's say in the racing analytics platform, and it brings that shape of the field in, and it gives you an average blend, and the blend is all horses average on their past 365 days performances. It comes up at around 2.8 lengths below the standard. And then when you bring in the race matrix and you overlay that and saying, okay, the first horse and the second horse are right up there. Well, number one, if you look at Shiny New Deal, just its last 6 runs, I mean, the best it's done is 4 lengths below standard. And then if you look at the gap is between the third horse and the rest is they're not that good, Ralphie. That's the problem, because if you then get that bucket and isolate it, they're probably mean average around -5.
Yep.
So it's got to push up. I've pushed it up, but I've pushed it down against the overall final time because it just doesn't stack up. And the reason why I do this is if I left it in its content and says, okay, this horse could be potentially a +4 horse, well, that means I'm looking at a Group 1 horse, or definitely a group horse, and you'd want to back it everywhere it turns up. Is that smart? Because the ultimate game is when you're using the measurement is you're also wanting to protect yourself. I know I got a raw figure of +4. I can use that anytime I like. And okay, maybe I've been a bit too harsh with a -2.7 overall performance, and perhaps it could be a benchmark. But I don't believe it's a +4. Let's see what happens. If this horse is in a group race, would you be confident?
Not at this age, no.
No, so I want to see that trend up, but that's what happens. So this is the distortion now that you can have into play, and this is one of the reasons why I have the adjustments in play and I don't touch the raws, is so I can have that reflection. Even on the raws, Rolf, you see, this is the thing, right? You look at the raws and you say, okay, we've got a +4. Like if that should be +15, but it's not. It's +4.
Yep.
So I'm not knocking the run. I think the performance was fantastic. Was the setup probably designed for a lot of horses to suffer in the race? I'd say yes, because you're going almost 9 lengths faster than standard. The gap between the third horse and onwards, I feel it's more of a reflection of the quality of those group of horses, because when you just look at their leading 6 runs, so many of them had -10s, -13s. I don't want to water things down and say, yeah, that's like a race on some, not even a B-grade provincial track. It's like I'm going to Traralgon. I don't know. I'm not saying I'm going all the way out to Mortlake, but that's what the reflection of a lot of those numbers are. So these horses that have come first and second, or the winner in particular, it should beat them by that much.
Yep. All right. Well, we'll get to see him in a couple of weeks at Flemington in a benchmark 80, I think Rob Hickmont said. We'll see him again. Mighty, and I'll finish with this one for Sandown. I want to ask you about Mighty. I was high-fiving with you, Vince, because I saw in your race speed profiles you had him on top. I was very keen on this horse, given the setup. And sometimes the best jockeys, and I've said this often, both in our preview podcast and here on the Mondays, when a good jockey sticks with a horse after an unplaced run, gee, it's a good sign. Blinkers went on. Blake Shin stayed on. He was happy. And really, we put the big sizzler stamp on him first up at Moonee Valley. It was an excellent run. Best last 800 and 600 of the day. But just at Flemington, sometimes I can float up the straight. Blinkers on. Wind up. Now, overall, not a big time, but what's real? Best last 800, 600, 400, 200 a day. And Blake Shin owned this race from midfield.
Yeah, I thought it was beautiful. First of all, not overtaxing the horse through the first section. Beautiful, 4.2 lengths below benchmark. Really comparable to its previous two starts. In the mid-race, again, no massive overreaction. Just the way the race was set up. Still travelling 2.2 lengths below. And then it really left it for what have you got under the bonnet to give over the last 400 metres. And there it was, +6. And we've seen this horse run up somewhere near that level in the past, like last campaign, where it was on the hillside and went +5 last 400 metres. So you know the horse is capable. And gee whiz, Ralphie, I can't help but feel this is one horse that you definitely want to follow up on where it starts next.
Yeah, they've got the key to it now. I don't think it'll be up the straight again.
Well, fair enough.
But I think they'll keep it as a real one. I think a Moonee Valley Rail True 1000. I think it'll be dynamic now that it's fit. Now, I also want to ask you about. I've got a little clip I'm going to play you shortly about investment and punting advice. And the bloke isn't talking about punting. So there you go. Because I like throwing some left field ones at you when it's not Group 1 season. But a reminder this Friday, our Group 1 podcast, preview podcast returns. So you can go to my website, racetrackralphie.com.au. If you're an existing Daily Sectionals customer, you can get an audio-only top-up, but we're doing the Ore Stakes on the Friday. We do a deep dive into all the feature races on Saturday. We talk business with an updated podcast, post-scratchings, and you get the final edition of Vince's cutting-edge race speed profile. So join in should you wish. Rose Hill, before we ask a bit about some punting allocation chat, Rose Hill, the shortest price horse in Melbourne or Sydney, was Yorkshire. He turned up, hadn't done a lot on the clock, but he'd done it very well. On Saturday, it looked like he put something on the clock now, Vince.
Well, that's good, isn't it, Ralph? You've got to like that. Well, first of all, best of the day, overall performance of +1.4. And I just love the way the horse has done it. 1.8 above benchmark first split time. Between the 8 and the 4, horse has actually regressed negatively 0.9, about a length. Not major, but there's still a little bit of a goal. Last 400, though, rock solid, +3.6. I'm just looking at it like this. Not the perfect display of energy distribution from start to finish, sort of giving me some sort of confidence there's horse has still got the potential to do a bit more.
Yep.
And that's exciting. And I just feel this is an excellent horse, Ralphie. And the way J-Mac rode it, I can't help but feel that I'm sure he must be feeling that this horse can probably still go further up, and it's lightly raced.
Well, John O'Shea afterwards said that they've got a long-term target of the Ingham and the Big Dance at Randwick and we know that +2, +3 range can win you both those races. So
for sure,
it's right in his wheelhouse.
It definitely is.
Now, race 8 on the program here. Oh dear, I've got to ask you about that. It's only benchmark 88, but sorry, it was the Group 3 on the day.
Yep.
Willoud had been trialling really well. But race shape. I was cheering Iona Merck, just missed. Tell us about the difference between Willard, who by the way, before we talk about it though, about the breakdown, he's a winner. He just puts his head out all the time, doesn't he?
Yeah, he is, Ralphie, and it's a pretty positive return as well when you look at, number one, the race was really weird in terms, they've gone out good speed. I mean, the leader's hard to say has gone 0.3 below benchmark. It's not like a world record pace or anything, but it's just a nice, good, solid speed. You're not travelling very slow, but a few horses around it, like Iona Merck, 7.1 below benchmark. Disney, 10.1 below. I don't know what they were doing, right? And then the winner, 2.4. Like, I mean, how well was that summed up from a rider perspective? Beautiful. Stalked in the golden spot. I just wonder, were all the riders on the ball?
Didn't look it.
No. So then what's happened is the pressure's come on in the mid-race. And this has definitely changed the heat of your setup. Like, all of a sudden now, if you've got pressure in the mid-race and they're going to go flat out over the last 400 metres, being 5 or 7 lengths off the lead pack, let's just call it, is a very bad place to be. Like, it's unwinnable.
Well, the ride of Disney, and I'm not barracking because I was on high in a Merc, but the ride on Disney, it reminded me, and we spoke about it on this podcast, of Robusto rather. Zach Lloyd, the same jockey, just completely sleepy at the back, giving it no chance. And then Robusto went on to win in Ingham and had a super prep after. It was the Hawkesbury meeting on the Thursday. You've got to put some intent into a race. What's the point of being out the back like that?
Yeah, so I'm trying to understand, like, why has that happened? Now, if you look at Disney's profile, with the exception of the very last run, which was like 28 days ago, the two previous starts, they were probably in line with where the horse wants to sit, like travelling around 9 or 10 lengths below benchmark. But that ain't going to help you to win. It needed to be doing something a lot closer to what it did at Randwick when it was a great performance in a small field, travelling almost benchmark. So yeah, this was very bad. Now, could that be that the horse didn't want to go through the first split, or was the rider feeling maybe they're going too fast? I don't know what's going in their minds and why they're thinking this, or was the plan stay out the back and just come home with a hard run? It's hard to know.
We'll be writing that one up in Sizzles. You can read about that. I suppose we're going to sum up that at the moment, our Blue Diamond previews of this week, but at the moment, just touching on this Widden and the, I've got the name of the other race, the Colts race 3, the Widden in race 4. At the moment, I had a real good look at this, Vince. There's no 2-year-olds who are elite yet. Now, probably the playwright Tempted, it was a blanket finish, but not a bad performance, particularly by Tempted to make ground on that track.
Yeah, not a bad performance, but it's like everything. Playwright's gone out at a pretty good pace, 0.3 lengths below benchmark. Nice move in the mid-race, 3.2 above. No one could really match that in the middle. So the horse really did own the race for the first, let's call it 700 metres, and was entitled to drop off. But there was just that little bit of a dip there before the 4 and the 2, Ralphie, where the riders, in my view, when I'm looking at the intel, is very inefficient in terms of the distribution of energy. The horse has dropped like almost 4 lengths in that split. Now, that's pretty critical. And what that does is that has made, I feel, a bunch of the other horses look a bit better in terms of their overall performance. Because when you then look at the last 200 metres of Playwright, it's actually kicked back down and found the length on the previous split. So I'm just sitting here asking myself the question, there's probably inefficiency in the horse of a couple of lengths. What would you do then? Would you still have the same view? Now, when I look at someone like Tempted, the variation in that 4-2 was virtually nil.
And same with Schnitzel Miss.
Yep. And they were the critical horses, right?
Yep.
Horses like In Limbo was pretty savage, not very good in terms of their energy distribution. But ultimately, Ralph, I feel that you summed it up at the start about we haven't seen it yet. I know there's talk about that New Zealand horse, that ran on the weekend. Now, that ground wasn't that good, as it turned out, in New Zealand, so you can't take a real view. But I did the work on the trial and its very first race start, and I'd pinned that New Zealand horse somewhere around that -4 range with the potential to go to benchmark. Now, unfortunately, the Ellerslie run, we probably can't get real guide because they were running well below standard. But the trial leading in was suggesting to me that potentially this horse is trending to be like a top sort of 10 2-year-old against what we've got, if it could just make that next step. So, I don't know. Is there something else hidden somewhere?
I think so. I think we're about to see something in the next couple of weeks because at the moment, -2 is about good enough. There was a trialer. Ooh, Vince, this time last year I asked you about a horse with a very similar profile, and it was called Lady of Camelot. The Golden Slipper. I'm not saying it's going to win the Golden Slipper, but I am saying I can't wait to ask you about it in our trials. So our Group 1 bonus today, we're going to look at some trials from Warwick Farm and from Rose Hill and from Geelong. So a couple of good trialers there and some good horses there. So if you want to be a Group 1 member, just sign up and you'll get our bonus podcast. And that was where we found Lady of Camelot this time last year. Don't know if we will, but I know it's big odds. So looking forward to chatting to you. Before we finish, just a little bit of, I like a left field one to throw at you. There's a Bloomberg podcast called Odd Lots, and it's fantastic. They had this legendary investor called Howard Marks on. I want to play you a minute of it, and then afterwards I'll get your take about it from a punting allocation perspective.
One thing I argue strenuously, Joe, is that in the investment business, there's no place for certainty. And Mark Twain said, it ain't what you don't know that gets you into trouble. It's what you know for certain that just ain't true. And so you can have opinions, but you should never be certain that you're right. And you should never arrange your financial affairs on the assumption that your forecast is right, because it can be right intellectually or factually or rationally, but just take a long time to materialize. And if you can't survive between when you take your position and when your expectation comes true, then obviously it's not something you should do. And one of my colleagues once wrote a note to his clients. He says, if you name a price, don't name a date. And if you name a date, don't name a price.
So that's good advice for journalists too.
Yeah. But anybody who names a price and a date is probably going to get carried out of it sooner or later.
Vince, I thought that was fantastic, and I'm going from this position. A couple of his quotes: "You can have opinions, but never be certain you're right. You should never arrange your financial affairs that your assumption is right. It can be intellectually right or factually right, but it mightn't be right on the day." Now, if you had thought Via Sustina was the best horse in the country, and you backed her mid-September, and you had too much on it, you're broke and you didn't get to enjoy the Spring Carnival. So the allocation of funds is so important in our game.
Oh, wow, yeah. Gee, where do you find all these things, Ruff? It's unbelievable.
You never know where I'll throw one at you.
Yeah, no, well, it was really nice to listen to that. It's so true, though, right? It's so true in so many different ways. And this is the thing about the game, right? And one of the reasons why I personally like to play, with the chips 1/4 type ratios, because I might be right when I'm doing the form, but there's so many other variables that you have no idea what may or may not happen, and you're hoping that you have that high probability in your favour that the horse is going to still finish on the podium, and therefore alleviate some of the risk. But still, it doesn't mean that on the day you're not going to get victory when you feel you've got all the numbers right, because the horse might not turn up for other reasons.
I often say the Black Caviar and Winks taught the average punter nothing because they were never beaten, but Winks missed the start one day. Black Caviar famously just won at Royal Ascot when not right on the day.